Are live on YouTube.
Hello. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. It is Thursday, April 24th, and we are continuing to take testimony on H181, an act relating to the residential and commercial building energy standards. And we're here today with Matthew Bushy, and we'll go around the room and quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor Bend. Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Representative Sibilia will be right back. Online, we have Representative Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Great. And in the room,
Nathaniel Eisen, I'm a freelance journalist here today for Good Government.
Andrew Brewer, Downs Ragland Martin on behalf of the architects.
great.
Bob Duncan Wisniewski Architecture in Burlington, here on behalf of AIA Vermont.
Great.
And Matt Sorensen, UVM legislative intern for Representative Anga.
Great. All righty. For the record, if you could introduce yourself, and we're ready for your testimony.
Great. Thank you so much. Matthew Bushy. I am, thank you for having us here. And Bob Duncan is going to be speaking following my time. Apologies that I'm not connected, but you all have. Oh, we are connected.
You give me the nod.
You got
I will
it.
scroll. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. I can close this and we're in business. Thank you very much. My name is Matthew Bushy. I grew up in St. Albans and I'm currently a resident of Burlington. I'm a licensed architect, registered in Vermont. I also have a architectural license in Massachusetts and New York. I actually started my career in Massachusetts. I studied for my exams there and spent 10 years in Massachusetts. That's where I first got licensed and started my career working under the Massachusetts Building Code. And then I've been in Vermont for the past 18 years or so. Currently, I'm the managing principal at Truex Collins. We are about 30 staff people, our architecture firm in Burlington. At 30, we're on the larger side for architecture firms in Vermont. And we do commercial and residential projects. So I'm here today representing AI Vermont, both of us are. I am a past board member, past president of AI Vermont. AI Vermont has about 300 members statewide. And I am currently representing AI Vermont on the Building Energy Code Working Group. So I have been on that group. That's a 2-year stint, and we kind of hit our halfway point and issued our first report in November, and we will reconvene in next month, I believe, and work through the summer and issue our final report in November of this year. There's about 15 people, I believe, on that working group. And so I'm one of those representing AI Vermont. Let's see. You can go to the next slide, please.
You would think I could. That way. There we go.
So we're here to talk about H181, and as you know, there are a few items in this bill. Just to focus on 2 of them, AI Vermont supports all content in H181, but just to highlight, a couple: extending the Building Energy Code Working Group until a state entity is named to enforce a building energy code. We support that. Our work is not done and it needs to continue. And it says, we put the language pointing to naming an AHJ has become more focused. I'll show what I mean by that in the next slide. As kind of last year, the study committee started this effort, and it's kind of focusing in on some solutions. And then the PSD shall develop a framework to attribute energy savings to building energy code compliance. We support that. And that kind of relates to the fact that we believe that the energy efficiency utilities play an important role in a potential solution here. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And the role that the Energy Efficiency Vermont has the energy professionals on the ground. And there's certainly a role for them to play as we look at solutions. So if you can go to the next slide. I thought I'd just start with a brief kind of history of these working groups and where we're at and where we're going. So it started in 2023 with Act 47, and there were a number of charges in that act, one of which was to recommend strategies to increase awareness and compliance. And the wording here, which I highlighted, was to consider the potential designation of DFS as the authority having jurisdiction. Look at multiple options, but of those, one potential is naming DFS as the authority having jurisdiction. And so that group, and I was not on that group in 2023. Bob Duncan was representing AI Vermont with Sandy Fitz, who you heard from yesterday. And there were some of us in AIA who were kind of collaborating with them kind of behind the scenes, because they were, and as I am now, representing the whole organization. So that report was pretty complete. That came out last year, and there were 20 plus recommendations made in this report. But I think the two important ones are listed here. One was to affirm that yes, DFS should be the authority to head up this effort, the code effort. There were some dissenters, as you saw, but the consensus in that group was to kind of respond to the charge, consider this, and the response was, yes, for all these reasons, this is what we believe. And then the second thing that I put up here was that one of the recommendations was to establish a committee to study the adoption of a statewide residential building code. And one of the charges in Act 47 was to explore the relationship between the energy code and the building code. And that's all it said, explore the relationship. And so the committee, the study committee came back and said, we've explored the relationship and we think that this should be explored further and that a statewide residential building code should be established. And so that was that report. And then that led to Act 151 in last year. And that had 3 charges for the group. And I find it interesting to see, you can see how the language is kind of focusing in. Number 1, recommend strategies to increase compliance, including certifications for contractors. And that was one thing that we looked at. But number 2 takes it a step further, whereas the previous year was to look at options, consider this. Now the charge is, okay, develop plans for, and it names DFS for RBs and CBs. And then number 3, consider whether or not the state should adopt a statewide building code. So that was in the legislation, more focused than the previous year's legislation, which makes sense because it's responding to the work of the study committee as it evolves. So we came out with part 1 of our report, basically, that last November. And this, to be honest, is fairly light. I think that our final report will contain more meat. But what this did, this had about 10 recommendations or so. Yeah, but I think the main ones I listed here. Number 1, establish a role for the energy efficiency utilities. This does not say what that role is, but it says that a role should be established. So we'll look at that more this year. Establish a process for state filing of RB certificates. That was a big topic of our group. right now the certificates are filed through local municipalities, and that's going to be changing so that it's more integrated with a state system. And so folks are looking at that. So that was part of our recommendations. And then in response to the charge to consider whether or not the state should adopt a statewide building code, the report said it made note of the fact that DFS has formed a working group to look at this. And certain members of this group are working with Mike DeRocher and looking at that. So there's multiple kind of groups that are in sync, and we made note of that in the report. So that's where we are right now. We can go, oh, here we go. So that's where we are right now. And we're going to be, like I said, continuing our work this year and coming up with the final report. So just to
Did you say, sorry about the continuing of the work. Did you say you're going to meet throughout the summer and fall?
Yes.
So you haven't met,
we haven't met since November.
okay, gotcha. I thought I heard that right. Great. Is that just, does that have anything to do with the legislative session, or is it just how it's going? So that's intentional.
Yes. Yeah. That's
Okay.
just,
Is that how we set it up, or is it just how it's happening?
I don't know if the specific schedule is stipulated in the,
Probably not.
Not in the legislation.
Okay.
That's just the way it's
All right.
scheduled.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
All right.
So just to step back a little bit, it's good, I think, to see this in a chart to start the conversation just with an understanding of where we are right now and what codes apply to what building types, because the way it works is, of course, that the energy code and the building codes are based on building typologies. So you can see on this chart, the top half is the energy code and the bottom half is the building code. So CBs applies to commercial buildings and multifamily residential over 3 stories, and all the rest here would fall under RBs. Hosting certificates applies to all these building types except not owner-occupied single-family homes. There is no code compliance, so to speak. Although Efficiency Vermont does review projects that are enrolled in their program, but only projects that are enrolled in their program. And that's not energy code, that's their own metrics, but it's put on this chart for reference. For the building code, it's a combination of NFPA and IBC, and you heard some of that yesterday, that applies to commercial buildings and multifamily residential, but not owner-occupied single-family homes, except for some limited kind of targeted areas like plumbing. DFS has enforcement authority for commercial and multifamily and rental properties, but not owner-occupied single-family homes. And they do on-site work inspections for those same categories. So this is a review, but I think it's can be handy to see it in black and white.
And the DFS inspections, those are, that's every property, right? That's a standard. It's not like a spot check. They go in, and I'm on the on-site verification.
Yes.
Can you just remind me how that works? They're going to visit every project to issue it.
Yeah, well, of course, I live in Burlington, so it's a little bit different as we have the Burlington inspector comes in for those properties, but
Okay,
otherwise it would be from Department of Fire Safety.
okay. Yeah, Rep Howland?
What happens if it's like the old in-law apartment. Every apartment you're putting in a house is an in-law apartment, but the in-laws never move in. What happens when a home gets built, gets occupied for a bit, or never occupied by the developer and becomes a rental after the fact? Have they skipped this whole process?
Well, inspections would happen kind of in sync with construction or renovation project. So if there's no construction or renovation projects, then I don't believe there would be a role for them.
Right, so somebody could bypass this whole rental property, single family home rental property, by constructing the home, building it, lock the door once. Close the mortgage and decide he's not gonna sell the spec house, he's gonna rent it.
Dispose.
And they bypassed this,
I suppose that's true.
go back.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, the crux of all of this, of course, is that the energy code is getting more stringent and the compliance, we believe, is decreasing. In this chart, the red line is showing energy use intensity, which is one way to measure energy performance of a building. But in general terms, we know that we're on a path towards net zero ready by the year 2030. That's the state's goal. And so it's common knowledge that the energy code is on that trajectory. So that's why we're showing the arrow going up. And the blue line here is compliance dropping. Now, a lot of people are throwing around this number of 50% compliance. And we believe compliance is lower than that. But the 50% number comes from studies that were done based on sample size of properties. And I believe Kelly mentioned yesterday that one of the most recent assessments was based on 20 properties and 20. I don't know if that's shown here because this goes to, yeah, it might be on here. But so that's a small sample size. There are some that believe there's issues with the sample properties, what part of the state they're from. So there's questions around that. So we're wondering if there's a better way to determine what the real compliance is. It's really hard to say. It's hard to put a number on that. But one way to do that is to look at the certificates that are being filed compared to the building permits that are being pulled, which is what you see here. So the dashed line across the top is the official kind of state's position as to what compliance looks like based on these studies and surveys that were taken. So you can see it's kind of dipping down to 54% in the year 2015. And by the way, the vertical gray bars on this chart show when the energy code was updated. So that's each time the new RVs comes out. What we do a lot of digging and a lot of collecting information. We're able to compare the percentage RV certificates filed against the building permits pulled. And so for 3 counties, this data goes back to 1998. And for the rest of the state, it starts at 2012. So it's all these colored lines up here. If you take those and average them out, where we're at right now is 8.5% of residential building permits also filed an RV certificate. So does that mean that only 8.5% of homes are compliant? Well, no. It's probably higher than that. But I would say it's also probably less than 54. So it's in between those two numbers somewhere. If you're making an effort to follow the energy code, then I would think that it'd be likely that you would file the certificate. So that's kind of the best data we have right now on compliance.
Yeah,
Sorry. Is there any benefit to the builder to file this certificate?
Well, they're required to.
Yeah. But I mean, is it easier to?
The way theoretically you would not receive a certificate of occupancy until it was posted. But of course, that doesn't apply to single family homes. That would be multifamily and commercial.
Okay.
Not a big benefit. Makes you feel good.
Yeah. Okay.
get entered into a 50-50 raffle. There's an idea. Okay.
Yes, so let's see. I have notes, but I think I can remember everything. So this right here shows you where the certificates are being filed. And Burlington is high on the list, but outside of Chittenden County, it really drops off, and you can see that most towns are under 10%.
What's the deal with Dorset?
Yeah, so Sandy Fitzhume actually scoured the state to get all this information and did a bang up job. A lot of the certificates were undated, and so it was this shows from 1998 to 2018, which is a pretty wide range there. But the town of Dorset had a very low number of permits and a large number of undated certificates. So it could be that there was a discrepancy with the number of building permits, or not many weren't filed.
Just curious.
It's kind of an anomaly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Are they filed with the deed? When they say they're filed with the town, by
The RV certificates are filed with the town clerk, I believe. It's with the town clerk.
just a separate file cabinet, or
Yeah.
not attached to the deed or anything?
No, it's not touched.
Probably 251 answers to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, Rep Allen. Yeah.
We always associated the building permit process to be more connected with the listers and assessors to for the value of the home rather than any energy code compliance or the like. It was more of a taxation that you can see some of these have they don't issue building permits.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's two separate things.
Thank you.
So now we get to how Vermont differs from other states. And I know Sandy touched on this a little bit yesterday, and she showed the kind of the petri dish graphic. This is another way to look at it. This is the Trivial Pursuit game board version. But basically, in other states, we believe, this is one reason for the drop in compliance is the lack of a single authority. That's putting it mildly. I think we believe that's the main reason. But in other states, as you see on the left, everything is combined under one authority having jurisdiction. So energy, building code, accessibility, it's all under one body. I mentioned that I started my career in Massachusetts. I became licensed and worked under the Massachusetts Building Code, which was one blue 3-ring binder, it was thick, like 5 inches thick, and everything was in there. And there was a chapter on existing buildings. There was a chapter on residential. There was a chapter on energy efficiency. But it was all together. Whereas here in Vermont, of course, we have different state entities managing all these different pieces. And the lack of a residential building code is a missing piece of the pie.
What's the most common AHJ in other states? Is it fire and safety? Is it its own separate standalone state agency that has its own name? The agency, building codes or something? Like who typically does this? Do you know?
I don't know of the typical, but I imagine it would be one agency tasked with that. Yeah, there's probably many ways to do it.
Okay.
In fact,
Yeah.
next.
Sorry, Brett Bailey.
Yeah, backing up to just to the certificates. So if you have been contracted to build a house or design a house, who fills this out? And who,
The contractor.
the contractor is required
Yeah.
to fill this out?
Yeah. We, as architects, we have had contractors ask us about it. How do I fill this out? But it's the contractor who would fill it out and post it. And then when it's posted, you would receive your certificate of occupancy.
I will submit a copy of that certificate to Jack, just so you can see it.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, just so you can
Actually,
see
I'd
what it
love to see
looks
that.
like,
Yeah.
If I could jump in, this is Scott Campbell. That certification filled out by the contractor is a self-certification. There's no third party that corroborates the information there.
Okay. Thanks, Rep Campbell.
So all this is, we want to make building easier. And so, it will be easier for builders if there can be kind of a one-stop shop for all this. And we're saying that Vermont is the only state with no authority or no pathway to authority for residential single-family construction, which is a big statement to make. So this is the kind of data to back that up. And you saw this yesterday, but we thought we'd share it, explain what it is exactly that we're looking at here. This shows both building code and energy code level of authority and administration. And then the year that's printed under each state is the year for the code that is used. This is now a couple of years old. This was prepared for the first report from the 2023 study committee. So it is a couple of years old, but I think it's still valid. And Vermont is the only one here in red, which shows that there is no statewide use of IRC for residential. The blue, which is across the top, is showing the level of energy code that is in use in each state. And you can see Vermont is the darkest blue. So we are the most stringent energy code followers.
The most stringent energy code aspirants.
Yeah.
Is that a word? I think so.
You just made it a word.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
good word.
But it's one of those words that you see it written down all the time, and then the first time you ever say it out loud, you're like, I don't know if that's right. Okay.
I think the closest state to us would be Alaska. But even they have more building code authority and practice in places like Anchorage, but then the whole rest of the state is just polar bears. So
Wait, on the chart,
I mean, I just think it's telling that the closest state to us in how the building code is practiced or not is a state that is the largest in the nation by land area. So you would think that we would be able to do this.
but on your chart, Alaska's white.
But for the building code is the first row, commercial edition of IBC with amendments. So they're following 2021.
Yep. Okay.
Small residential edition of IRC with amendments. So they follow building code for residential projects in populated areas, but some of these states have a statewide authority, and some of them kind of leave it up to municipalities.
Alaska's white because they have a building code, but no energy.
No energy code, right? it really runs the gamut. That chart is arranged regionally, so all the Northeast states are across the top. But you know, in summary, like this is what we believe, that without reform, we're not going to meet our energy goals. It's great to have the very kind of high aspirations and a very stringent energy code, but if compliance is decreasing or if compliance is low, then it may look good on paper, but you're not really achieving what the state sets out to achieve. And then the second 2 points on here about builder risk and liability and homeowners facing kind of safety hazards and building science failures, that speaks to the fact that we're at the point now that the energy code is becoming more complicated, more technical to make a wall. It's not only about the amount of insulation, but it's about the location of the insulation, proper air barriers, managing moisture and infiltration. So that's why this is more of an issue now than it was 5-10 years ago. And as the code gets more stringent on our way to 2030, it's just going to get harder to do, and it's going to get easier to make mistakes if builders don't have the proper training and support. So this is what AI Vermont supports: training and education, utilizing energy professionals. Like I said, you know, Deficiency Vermont has expertise. They're people on the ground, so they're part of the solution that we see. Establishing the IRC as Vermont's building code for single-family homes. And there is a study group that's looking at this. DFS working group. And then naming DFS as the authority having jurisdiction is what we believe is the way to go. The next slide is the last one here I have, which shows a little bit of the detail that we're looking at. It's easy to say that DFS should be the AHJ, should be the authority. We're actually working on a plan, which was the charge of the working group, and to look at exactly how that can work. So this chart was not published in last year's report. But it is mentioned in here as something that we're going to be looking at this year. And we're hopeful that something like this will end up in the final report. Basically, we understand this is a multi-year effort. And it's we're proposing a phased effort. So you can see on the chart, and the details will change, but in general terms, you can see that this is showing every 2 years, you could phase in the next step. So for example, the DFS currently has purview over rentals and duplexes. So you could phase that building type in for the energy code, for them to apply the energy code, and then later fold in owner-occupied homes.
So just looking at this phase timeline, which I understand is a draft. So the assumption or the proposal there is that by 2028, we would have residential. We would have a statewide building code for residential owner occupied, right? Am I looking at that right? So
Yes.
under general authority, residential building codes,
Yeah.
owner occupied single family, you're assuming that we enact that.
Yes. Now this was from last year, so the dates may move out, but in concept, like
That's the idea.
the idea is like it can take a couple steps to get there.
Yeah.
But we're looking at a timeline of like 6+ years. And then in the blue on this chart, the blue I wanted to point out is the energy efficiency utilities. And so currently Efficiency Vermont, like I said, does conduct site visits for projects that are in their program. So they have the expertise. And so this is showing site visits kind of down in the middle, third of the way down, site visits for EPT projects. You can see they're already doing that. Site visits for commercial and multifamily, perhaps they, bring that onto their plate. But then it could transition to DFS. Site visits for owner-occupied single-family homes, that could come a couple of years later. So it'd be kind of steps. So this is one of the things we're going to be looking at this year and hopefully putting in the report in November. The working group was also charged with looking at funding sources, and so we'll be looking at that as well. That was touched on a little bit yesterday with permit fees. But it'll all be, we have a lot of work to do, and we're looking forward to kind of bringing this together.
How often do you meet in the office?
It starts out monthly, but then as we get closer to the deadline, it's bi-weekly or maybe even once a week towards the end.
Okay. Leading up to the all-nighter before November 15th.
Yeah.
No comment. Yeah. Rep Bailey?
So let me ask you this, are all the architects in the state voluntarily using the IRC, the big residential building code when you guys are designing all these houses?
For single family homes?
For single family homes.
In general terms, perhaps, but not explicitly, as it's not required, but that perhaps is the goal or the intent.
Okay, so
I would say it'd be a stretch to say all firms do that. We're obligated by our license to follow the law.
right.
Law doesn't exist.
So
So
I don't understand that, but I'm
yeah,
figuring that voluntarily that great big book that she had yesterday would be right on your desk.
but that big book that she had yesterday did not include the IRC because it doesn't exist in Vermont. So,
Well, the one she was shown.
oh yeah, but that's not something that typically everybody has because it's not a code that exists. It's normal. Speaking only for, well, perhaps I'm sitting on the sideline now, so
I'm all set. You can.
It's normal for folks in our firm to follow those rules, even though the law doesn't exist. So for instance, I'm going to make an assumption that perhaps many of you in this room live in a single family home and some of you may have an attached garage. The International Residential Code requires that wall between the house and the garage to at least have sheetrock on it. The door that separates the house from the garage has to be a rated fire door and it has to be self-closing. So when you go from your garage to your house, does the door close automatically behind you? If it doesn't meet the IRC, but there is no IRC. But as an example, for any house that we designed, if it has an attached garage, it will comply with those requirements. It will comply with the requirement the garage can't be at the same floor level as the house because of fumes related to the gasoline and so on. It will comply with minimum widths for stairwells. It will comply with minimum handrail heights and requirements and that sort of thing. Because we know what those rules are.
Can somebody hold themselves out as an architect and only do residential consulting?
By choice, you could.
No, without having a registration.
Don't.
Oh,
See,
You
so
can't call yourself an
you
architect.
can't call yourself an architect unless you
Unless you're
possess
licensed.
OBR,
Have a license yet.
license with OBR.
You're gonna switch seats.
right.
Yeah. I can duck out apologies, but Representative Sedalia, ranking member, is ably able. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Sorry to go.
Thanks, sir.
So, still morning. Good morning, folks. My name is Bob Duncan. I'm an architect from Burlington. and was founding principal of Duncan Wisniewski Architecture in Burlington. We established that company in 1984. I'm actually now officially not working full time. So I am like Matt. I was born in Vermont, just down the road here in Barrie. I went to Spalding High School. I got my professional degree from Penn State, included foreign study in Italy. So, and then came to Burlington for what I thought was a summer job in 1974. And it occurred to me the other day that I should maybe call the Guinness Book of World Records and see if I could get the record for the longest summer job in history, since I've worked there for over 50 years. So having done that and had a long career, most of the work in the last 30 years that we have done has been in commercial areas of work, multifamily and other commercial work. Prior to that, and during that time, we've done a lot of residential work, single family residential work, and prior to saying that from the 70s and 80s, did a lot of residential work. And of course, nowhere in any of that time has there been any building code in the state of Vermont for single family homes. Some municipalities do have their own rules. The state establishes ways that you're supposed to go about adopting those rules. I'm not sure that any of the municipalities that do that have actually gone through that process. Burlington in particular, I'm sure is not. But yet there are rules in places like Burlington. And because the state has not adopted a single family residential code, the folks in Burlington have decided the only code they can enforce on single family homes is the commercial code. So that means things like in the IRC, where your handrail on your deck would have to be 36 inches high, and Burlington has to be 42 inches high. So that is a minor example of differences. But if you were sitting on your deck, maybe with a view of the mountains or a view to the woods in your backyard or an urban view, you've got a railing that's in your eye line at 42 inches if you're for a residential home in Burlington. And so I just point that out because the city of Burlington, I think, would like to have a code that's statewide code that they could use as a format to be able to enforce instead of trying to pick and choose aspects of a commercial building code. But so for me, one of the things that I think is really important, and I want to highlight that over the course of my career, and certainly even in the last 10, 20, 30 years, that the changes in building typology, in construction methods, in energy codes is a whole different world. This is not our parents' or our grandparents' construction. There's a whole different educational process that needs to be employed to build properly in today's environment. And Matt alluded to that when you talked about, where's the air barrier? Where is there a vapor barrier? Where's that insulation? What type of insulation? How much is outside? How do you build that wall? How does the intersection of window and wall really work? And how does that intersection of roof and wall really work? And those are in the old days, you framed up a house and you put roof rafters on it and you put some insulation in and it leaked like a sieve and you burned more oil or gas or wood and everything dried out and everything was fine. Well, that's not the case anymore. And so it's a bit of an arduous task for builders to keep abreast with what's changing in terms of technology, and a new material comes out. So, well, why don't we try that? Well, how does that really work in terms of vapor diffusion? Where is that material appropriate in that wall assembly? So there are lots of things that need to be considered. And I think it's really important, especially now that we have a really advanced energy code, that we're able to marry construction techniques and energy code in a way that gets overseen by some authority having jurisdiction. There's two key provisions. I think AI Vermont supports H181 as it's presented, and I will say that some of the language in there about how EEUs work and how greenhouse gas things, that's a little bit above my pay grade. But I think that those are all stepping stones to what we need to do to get to our 2030 goals. But two really key components are the adoption of a building code and having a place for enforcement of the energy code. And for that, we see the place being the Division of Fire Safety. Now, I know that we pride ourselves in Vermont as being independent minded, and many of us don't like to be told what to do. And there's another layer of bureaucracy. And where does that costs come from and how's that paid for and so on. But I think it's important to be mindful as construction techniques and everything have changed, that it's a whole lot less expensive to build right the first time, the proper direction and supervision, than it is to fix a problem in 5, 10, 20 years. Sandy shared some examples yesterday of building failures. I'm aware of building failures. I'm sure Matt is. That if things are done correctly, that does happen. If they're not incorrectly, they can. And right now, there's no recourse for a homeowner or anybody else. If there's no authority having jurisdiction, there's no standard for building construction. There's no way for people to get any recourse on that. I think that's an important point. So you've heard some detailed testimony yesterday from Sandy, today from Matt, about the energy code and about building codes. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that, and I think rightfully so, we pat ourselves on the back for having one of the most advanced energy codes in the country. But it's sort of moot if less than 50%, probably way less than 50% of the projects that are being built under the residential energy code meet the residential code. So we can say what we want, that we're doing this great thing, but we're not really doing anything if we don't have compliance. And that compliance, to think of that as being only through education or through some sort of training force, it's just not enough by comparison to having one authority that oversees building code and energy code in the same place. There have been examples cited where there can be conflicts between the energy code and the building code, and it's useful, and we see this more under the CBs, because DFS does administer building permits for commercial buildings. They are supposed to be reviewing energy code as a part of that work, but they don't really do that. But if we find a place where there is something that tells us we need to do this in the energy code, but the building code is saying do that, even though the energy code says the building code supersedes the energy code, we can at least have a conversation with an official and say, this really is more important for longevity of the building to follow the energy code. Is there a path that we can do in the building code that will allow us to do both? We can have that conversation. Absent of having that sort of authority having jurisdiction, we can't have that conversation. So then it falls on the professional to say, well, look, which one am I going to follow and which one is the best one to do? And that's not a good place for any of us to be. We're also very supportive of the grace period that's being promoted here in terms of when a new code goes into effect. And I just want to remind you that even a residential building, more so commercial buildings, but even residential buildings, it's not uncommon for a house design to take a year from when somebody says, I'd like you to design my house, to when that's ready to be built, and to get the drawings done and ready to go. So having a longer grace period between adoption of codes is really beneficial, because you could be designing something up until the deadline of a code, and then be confronted with having to redo all sorts of details or other things in order to comply with that new code. And we try to be mindful of the changes in any codes, and many of us keep up with what's happening at DPS when a new code is being adopted. But take, for example, not sure what the right word is, but let's just say that delay in adoption of the 2024 code and not being able to actually get a fully complete document one can read for over a year beyond when it was, actually almost 2 years before it was initially intended to be applied. It's really a bad place to be. Like, is my job going to be done? Is this thing going to be in effect? Is it not going to be effective? It could go in effect next week. It might go in effect for 6 months. So it's really important for us to have that grace period. And finally, I'd like to close with a couple of anecdotes and a suggestion. My first anecdote is that in 2020, not long after the state shut down, an old client of mine that I'd done some work for many years ago called to see if I would help them design an addition to their house for an ADU. And so I happily did that. And it was a tough time to find a builder. And they looked around. They found 3 builders, actually. And I mentioned this in my comments. And one of the things that we put in our specifications for that, and when we're doing a small edition for a house, it's not like it's a specification book this thick. It's it's 10 pages long or 15 pages long. And one of the first things in that specification was all the work has to comply with the 2020 RBs. And two of those builders called the owner up and said, "What's RBs?" And that's astounding. Almost 25 years after RBs was established in Vermont, these two builders didn't know it existed. I find that to be a really telling story. The third builder knew about it, in fact, was happy to comply. And that's the person they hired. So that's what they got. And they did their certificate and they followed all the rules. But I think it's really something to think strongly about is that we have builders in the state that don't know a residential building code exists. And these were not people that just got out of high school with a pickup truck that were the builder. I mean, they've been in the trades for a while. The other anecdote that I'd like to share is that I have a friend who lives in Williston, and Williston does not have any building code requirements, like most municipalities in Vermont. And so she called me up, said, I've been in the house a certain number of years. The railing on my deck needs to be replaced. What do I call? What do I need to do about handrails and balusters for that deck? And I said, well, you can do whatever you want. So, well, what do you mean? I said, well, there is no building code. So there's nothing to stop you from putting no railing or any railing you want. You can put it in 20 inches high, you can put it in 40 inches high, and do whatever you want. She found it so hard to believe. She called the town offices and they're like, yeah, there's no requirement. You can do whatever you want. So it's interesting to me. And I think it's sort of sad for us to be in a situation where basic things for personal safety, like where is there a handrail and what height must it be and how far apart should the balusters be, in 2025, we don't have any regulations in Vermont that control that.
Well, and that's.
I'm hopeful that nobody's going to fall over that railing. I'm hopeful that no kid's going to get their head stuck between the balusters, but it seems to me that the time has come for us to be enacting a building code in the state of Vermont that can address certain functions like that. And finally, I want to just talk a little bit about what Matt was discussing in terms of the phasing of how building codes might come into effect. When we get approached to do a project, more often than not, especially on affordable housing projects, the client doesn't know where the money's coming from to build it. They know that this piece of land is available. They know that the zoning district in that town will allow a certain number of units to be built on it. So they have this idea, they come to us and we design a project for them that complies with the zoning ordinance, complies, eventually we know it's going to comply with the building code. We don't necessarily have to think about all those things during the design phase. But my point is that they have an idea that they're going to get from point A to point B 4 years down the road, but they don't know exactly how they're going to finance to get to point B. They just know they want to do it. And I think that's, as I was sitting here listening to Matt and thinking about this, I think that's kind of where we are as a state in this process. I think we have to decide that this is where we want to be, and we have to figure out how to get there. And I think that's a leap of faith, but I think we have to make a decision that we want to join the 21st century, like 49 other states have, and much of the rest of the developed world in terms of building codes. And we need to decide we're going to get to that point, and we're going to figure out how to finance it. And to that point, I just want to make sure that everyone understands something that Sandy said yesterday. She asked me to correct this in case you didn't understand it. I think she said in her testimony that the fee for a DFS permit was 8%. It's not 8%, it's 0.8%. So in other words, on a $100,000 house, not that you could build a $100,000 house today, but on $100,000 of construction, the fee would be $800. So it's $8 per $1,000 of construction, not $8 per $100 of construction. So that fee, if in the process of paying that fee and having those plans reviewed and having that construction reviewed, means that you don't have to spend $20,000 or $30,000 or $50,000 to fix your roof in 10 to 15 years. It's money well invested. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
ADU.
ADU.
What's that stand for?
Oh, accessory dwelling unit.
In-law.
Mother-in-law.
No, not the mother.
Your mother.
No, because you don't have to comply if you're building the mother-in-law apartment.
That's right.
So you have to change that to not.
Well, interestingly enough, my son is building a mother-in-law apartment for his mother-in-law in Burlington. And just anecdotally, it's something that I think we could think about, as a state, because there are no state rules. Okay. So in Burlington, independent of any state rules, the fire marshal and the building inspector have decided there's this one line in one of the commercial codes that Matt highlighted there, NFP 1, which is only about that thick. There's one line in there that says every building shall have an entrance within 50 feet of a public right of way. Okay. And if you don't, you must sprinkler the building. Okay. So any ADU being built in Burlington who doesn't have its front door within 50 feet of the curb of the street has to have a sprinkler system. So here we are, once again, maybe sort of patting ourselves on the back that we've allowed ADUs to be built in every municipality in the state. And we have one municipality that's making it $20,000 or more expensive per ADU if you're not 50 feet from the street with your entrance. And I'm not sure that's the intent of NFPA 1. It says that every building must have a door. If your ADU is attached to a house, they will grant an exception in Burlington if you can walk from the ADU through into the rest of the house, and the main house has a door within 50 feet. But if you don't, or if you want to have that apartment separated from the main house, then that ADU also has to have a door that's 50 feet from the street. So just an example of if there was a state code in effect and Burlington had to comply with it, then there wouldn't be this guessing as to what do we comply to and what will we make people comply with. I think we need a set of rules that apply statewide.
So thinking about the end state that we want to get to, we want houses to be energy efficient, and we don't want them to rot because people haven't managed the moisture migration properly. And to achieve that, energy code and building code and some enforcement, education for architects and contractors, and some enforcement, inspection/enforcement regime. And so a couple of questions. Does that, if we do all of that, does it continue to stay with DFS? And do they need to get a new name if that is all their thing, and have the fire safety group that's part of all the stuff they're doing?
I mean, to me, it seems administratively that it stays with DFS because it's already set up for that sort of work. Now, whether there's a separate division within DFS that is assigned only to residential construction compared to commercial construction, if there's a different way of, a system, there people are trained to do this work versus that work, so they only have to do one set of rules as opposed to all the rules, or maybe they're cross-trained in some of the basic rules of each code. But it seems like that's the place. But maybe there's, I'm not that familiar with all the machinations of state government and whether there's another entity that can handle it better. It just seems to us that DFS is the logical place to start.
They are the ones doing on-site inspections.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think
Last question.
I think that it's that the building codes are plumbing codes, electrical codes, building codes are subsets of fire protection, FP 101 or whatever it is.
Yeah, they're
National NFP 101. So they're really subcodes to the fire code. So the name of whether it just goes up a notch to being under public safety department.
My other question is, we build them so they're energy efficient and so that they don't rot, but Other than that, do building codes address quality of construction?
Yes. So for instance, and Sandy, I don't think mentioned this yesterday, but there was a building that she observed in St. Albans. Builder builds it. He clearly didn't know what he was doing and decides he needs a stair to go from the first floor to the basement. So they go in, floor's all frame, cut up the joist, cut up the plywood, boom, put a stair to the basement. Well, guess what? In 3 months, the floor starts to collapse. There's no structure to support it. Now, if you had the IRC, it tells you what to do. It tells you how to frame a stair up. That homeowner doesn't really have any recourse the way the rules are set up in Vermont right now. There's nobody to go to say this was incorrectly built because there's no standard.
Matt, your group, part of the charge you said was to look at financing. So presumably you look at how other states finance building inspections and all that.
Yes, yep. And working with BFS on that, Mike DeRusher has put some numbers, and Energy Futures Group had looked at this. And so we're all kind of coming together and looking at permit fees and other things.
Thank you.
And I'd like to give a shout out to DFS because I'm sure that Mike, it's hard for him to think about taking on extra work. But having been in practice as long as I have and having met and worked with every single person who's been in charge of that division, there's been no one who's worked on Dr. Rocher in my 50 plus years of doing this. He's really an incredible breath of fresh air in terms of that department. And I'm sure you've seen him in testimony and so on, but he's really done a great job. And it's hard. I know it's hard for him. And it's hard for him to accept this kind of suggestions that we're making, that we add more to his plate. But
okay, we're going to give Rep Campbell the last word.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank Matt and Bob for really illuminating and terrific testimony, and observe again that energy codes are, as I think Rep Howland is just keeps coming back to, are really a subset of building codes. And what we're talking about with energy codes is not necessarily energy efficiency. Not only energy efficiency, is really the quality of the building. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. When I was in the weatherization world, I realized pretty early on that actually we were involved in making buildings more comfortable, healthier, more durable. And if we did all that right, they were also more efficient. So what we're talking about is the quality of construction. And that's what we're trying to find ways to help improve, so that we're building buildings that don't need rehab after 5 or 10 or 20 years, but actually are built the right way the first time. That's what we're really talking about. Anyway, thanks, guys. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us.
thank you for having us.